Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom. I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and Christopher Renstrom Astrology, and I want to welcome you to this week's episode, which deals with the Venus-Jupiter conjunction taking place at 29 degrees Taurus, forming a departing sextile to Neptune at 29 degrees Pisces. Now that sounds like an awful lot is going on in the skies above, and indeed, there is an awful lot going on in the skies above. In fact, this is a very rare and even rarefied alignment of planets. First of all, it's not every day when we have the two benefics, Venus and Jupiter, forming a conjunction at 29 degrees Taurus, and it's not every day when they're forming a sextile to Neptune at 29 degrees Pisces. 29 degrees, as many of you know, is an anaretic degree in astrology. It's what we call a critical degree. And for these planets to be forming this kind of a configuration, Neptune, for instance, is right at the very end of Pisces, the zodiac sign that it rules, and Jupiter, which is the co-ruler of Pisces, is at the 29th degree of Taurus, falling under the beams and rays of Venus. So what I wanted to talk to you about today were the alignment of energies between Venus, Jupiter, and Neptune. These, to me, are much less about events or things taking place in your life. Certainly they might point to things like romance or romanticism or artistry or creativity, but there's so much more that's going on than just that. For these planets to align at these critical degrees, I think what we're going to be talking about this week is something that's very experiential. And I think we're going to be talking about something that's also going to feel very transcendent. The first planet that I want to address in this particular alignment is the planet Jupiter. Jupiter we know as being a planet connected to good fortune and higher purpose. Jupiter's kind of the I won the lottery planet, because whenever it's traveling through your particular zodiac sign, it brings good things with it, usually things associated with a rise in status, finances, and recognition. But Jupiter also has another association with it. It was the planet that was most associated to the Greek concept called Xenia. Xenia was the Greek word for the idea of guest friendship. And that's a theme that I really want to talk to you about today. What was guest friendship? Guest friendship was this idea that if a stranger was washed up on the shores of your island in ancient Greece, what did you do with this stranger, this person that no knowledge of who they were? Did you sell them into slavery? Did you offer them as human sacrifice to the gods? Did you just sort of leave them on the beach and let them fend for themselves? No, the idea of guest friendship in ancient Greece is that you would take a stranger in, a stranger who came knocking at your door. You would take them in and you would ask no questions whatsoever. And you would bathe the stranger, and you would clothe the stranger, and you would give the stranger lodgings for the night. And the stranger, in turn, wouldn't overstay their welcome, or make off with your silverware, or try to seduce your wife. The stranger, in turn, would also give you something back. It might be gratitude, it might be a story, it might be teaching you how to do something better, but in some regard, the stranger would give you something back. And so there was a union that was brought between two people who had no blood ties to one another, they had no national ties to one another, they didn't share the same culture, and it was also possible that they also didn't share the same language. And it was this idea of hospitality, of taking in someone who needed a place to stay. So this idea of hospitality, of taking someone in who was in a bad way, taking someone in whom you didn't know at all. You might not even have spoken the same language, but this idea of opening your door to someone in need, this idea of hospitality, this was something that was sacred to Zeus, the father of the gods in Greece. And likewise, it's also sacred to the planet Jupiter, the planet of good fortune and higher purpose. When I think of Jupiter, And when I think of this conjunction that's taking place, the conjunction between Jupiter and Venus with the sextile of Neptune, it puts me in mind of one of my favorite films. It was a film that was made in 1987, and the film was called Babette's Feast. I absolutely love this film, and if you haven't seen the film, I would strongly encourage you to go and watch it. It's like watching one painting after another in a marvelous story, a marvelous fable that talks about hospitality, that talks about love, and that talks about transcendence, themes that we will all be experiencing to some degree this week with the conjunction of Venus and Jupiter and the sextile to Neptune. Babette's Feast was written by Isak Dinesen. Her real name was Karen Blixen, but she wrote by a synonym, Isak Dinesen, and some of you may actually know another work of hers, which is Out of Africa. That was also made into a film, I believe in the 80s, with Meryl Streep and Robert Redford. But here, in Babette's Feast, we start with a small village, a town really, named Berlevåg, and it sat at the base of a fjord in Norway. And there lived in this small village two sisters, Martine and Philippa. One was named after Martin Luther, that's Martine, and the other was named after his friend Philip Melanchthon, and that was Philippa. And both sisters were daughters of a very revered dean, of a very revered holy man who was actually quite old when they were both born. And he basically raised the two girls on his own. Their mother was there for a while, but really the two girls were raised by him. And he regarded them as his two hands, his left hand and his right hand. And these two girls were absolutely beautiful, Martine and Philippa. And so when they went to church, because Martine and Philippa never went to any parties, and Martine and Philippa never went to any balls, they were two very good Puritan girls. The one place that they would go to was church. And when they went to church every Sunday, that church was packed because Martine was exquisitely beautiful, more beautiful than anything that could be imagined. And Philippa sang with the voice of angels. And so all the young men would come to church just to look at these two girls and to admire their beauty. And of course, want to marry them. Now, as time went on and the girls grew older, the different young men in the town would come and they would propose marriage, not to the two girls, but they would take an interview with their father, and their father would always say, well, it's pretty much up to the girls. And the girls would always decide in favor of not marrying because they wanted to be in service to their father. They wanted to be in service to God. And so in their purity, which was unmoved, there was also an exquisite beauty that would spell the downfall for two particular men who came from the great outside world. Now, the first of these men, his name was Lawrence Lowenheim, and he was a young army officer who had been sent by his father to this small village in Norway to get over his dissolute ways. What had happened, actually, is that Lawrence Lowenheim had become a soldier, but he was also taken to drinking and to gambling debts and really wasting away his life. He wasn't turning out well. So his father, disgusted with having to pay all of his gambling debts, said, you're going to go visit your aunt in her country house outside this small village in remote Norway at the bottom of some fjord, and you're going to get your act together. And so Lawrence goes off to visit his aunt in his military finery, and she welcomes him into her very large mansion. And you can tell right off the bat, and it shows in the film, that there's going to be no gambling or womanizing for Lauren, okay? He's out here on the edge of nowhere, and he's there to get his act together, whatever that might mean. So Lauren Lowenheim, being a young army officer, is looking around for something to do, and he parades around the village in his military uniform and his finery. But one day he's at market, and he happens to see Martine. And one look at Martine, and he's smitten. Now, smitten is such a great word for something like this, okay, because it means to smite, okay, to like with a blow. And so he's smitten by love. And this is where we begin to bring in the Venus part of this collection of planets. He absolutely falls in love with her. But the love that he feels for her is not what he has felt for other women who hang around the barracks and are there for fun and a fling. Okay, what he feels for her is something that's very deep and it's very powerful and it's very moving. And as a result of these feelings that he has for her, he is almost struck dumb. He can't really talk or speak. He just looks at her like in great admiration and great love. And she also returns his gaze, and it's very Venusian, this exchange of glances which turn into longer gazes. And so he is invited to her house where they're going to have prayer over a meal because her father has a congregation, a small congregation that he invites exclusively to his house. And Lauren, being a member of this congregation, they all go and they sit and they have meals, and he gets to know her. But as he gets to know Martine, it's really like he's forgetting himself. He's forgetting his wayward ways. He's forgetting his military career. He's realizing that this woman is someone that's very special, that this woman could change his life, and that by him taking dinner with her and meeting her at her father's house over and over, this woman is changing his life, and she is changing his life for the better. And it's at that point when Lowenheim realizes he can't follow through with this. If he's going to have a military career, he can't give himself over to this feeling of ecstasy, this feeling of almost mysticism when he's in her presence. It's more than Martine just being too good for him. There's something about Martine that also signals a whole different way of living. And I'm sure you've had an experience like that in your life where you've met someone. Sometimes it's amorous, and it can be in other different capacities, in which you see a future with this person, but it's really a future version of yourself that could be very different from who you are right now. Now, some of us go running towards that with great pleasure, with great joy. We're like, oh, I see what I could be reflected in your eyes, and I like that person. I want to be that person, and I want to be with you. This is a very Venusian idea. But then there are others of us that see that. We're moved in the presence of that person, and we don't think we're good enough, or we would lose control over our life, or we would lose a sense of our hands being on the steering wheel. And so we have to reject that. It becomes the road not taken. And this is exactly what happens to Lauren. They spend a lot of time together. Martine is definitely under the idea that they're courting one another. And one night after this small dinner in her father's house, which is a small, comfortable Norwegian house, he says to her, he kisses her hand and he looks her in the eye, and she's looking at him, and he says to her, I am going away forever, and I shall never see you again. For I have learned that life is hard and cruel, and that in this world there are things that are just impossible. And so he leaves her that night, and you can tell that he's broken her heart, but she doesn't show it on her face, and he departs her life, assumedly forever. Now, what he's saying is that I could go and follow you here, but I can't. I'm choosing a military career. I'm choosing fame. I'm choosing becoming a man of the world. And that's what he means by the world can be hard and cruel. He's a military man. He's fought battles. He's seen a lot of cruelty and he's seen a lot of hardness. But what's hard and cruel about the world that he's talking about is something that can only be seen through the eyes of Venus, named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty. He sees that he could follow this path of love and it's not going to work for him. It's not going to square with the way he sees himself. It's not going to square with his ambitions to go and be a great soldier out in the world. So what's hard and what's cruelty is having to say goodbye to Martine. A year later, there is a great opera singer whose name is Achille Pepin, and he's a great French opera singer, and he's comes to Stockholm, Sweden, to perform Mozart, and he's a great sensation, and all the ladies love him. I mean, he's a tenor. What do you want? Okay, so all the ladies love him, and he's the toast of Stockholm, which is the Venice of the North. And in the film, he's resting in his dressing room after an ingenious performance, and a lady comes back in her puffed hair and her finery, ready to have conversation with him. And he's, shh, shh, shh. She's like, oh, of course, I'll be quiet. What do you have to say? And he says, I need to ask you something. She's like, yes, certainly. What? And he's like, do you know of a faraway, remote village that I might visit? And she's like, well, yes, but why? And he's like, because I crave silence. I do not want conversation. No conversation. I want silence. Silence. I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to see anyone. I've sung a great performance tonight, and now I want to retreat from the world of the theater for a small time and just experience solitude. And she responds to him with like, how wonderfully melancholic. Yes, there's this wonderful little village, Berlevåg, which is at the bottom of a fjord in Norway, and it's just the village for you. And I happen to know, I mean, it's a very well-connected woman. I happen to know a grocer there, and you can stay in a room that I'm sure he will rent to you. And he's like, yes, I will go and ponder my life in this faraway, remote Norwegian village. And so with great drama and great flair, he disembarks for this village, and he takes a room of the grocer's, and he goes and he strolls along the ocean side and the cliffs, and it's very cold and it's very gray and it's very dark, and he's gotten very melancholic. And actually, Achille Pepin has become too melancholic. He is on the cliffs, and he sees his mortality, and he sees that he is an old singer, and that time is running out, and that his life has come to nothing, and he's full of depression and despair, and he heads back into the village, feeling very much more melancholic than he had originally anticipated he was going to feel. But he passes the church and hears this singing, and he stops, and he looks at the church, and he goes inside, and he sees singing Philippa near the altar. She's singing a hymn, and he is absolutely transfixed. He has absolutely found his next protege, the most purest voice, that if he could train her and take her to opera in Paris, that she will become the sensation of Paris, that the Empress will ask to see her, that he will become a famous name again, not as a singer, but having discovered and trained this operatic phenomenon, Philippa. And so he immediately seeks an introduction to Philippa's father, the minister, and he says that he's heard his daughter singing in church and he would like to train her. And her father's looking a little skeptical. And he's like, I want to train her so that she can sing heavenly praise to the angels, so that she can have the best voice as could possibly be as a gift and a manifestation of the Lord in this world. Wouldn't you want that? And so the father's like, oh, to make her sing more heavenly. Yes, that sounds like a wonderful idea. And so they agreed to music lessons. And so he begins to teach Philippa opera, and they do scales and they do singing, and she has an extraordinary voice. He cannot believe his good fortune in having found her. And he falls in love with her, basically. It's teacher and pupil, but it's a love that isn't carnal. It's a love that is the love of shared art, okay? And here we see a different side of Venus, because Venus is named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty, and also of singing, and also of music. And so what he is bonding with Philippa over here is music, is song, the way that their voices intertwine. This has brought him to life because Achille Pepin is a great operatic singer, and he had become tired of the world of fame, but now he has found restoration and replenishment, hope, and a future with Philippa as his protege. And so they happen to be singing Don Giovanni, which is a famous Mozart opera about a serial seducer. And they're singing the duet between Giovanni and Zerlina. In this duet, Zerlina talks about how she already has a boyfriend, but she's finding Don Giovanni's charms and seductions overpowering, and she's being tempted to follow him. And this is the text that they're singing, but it's also very clear that this is what's going on between these two artists. And so Pepin leans forward in the song and he kisses Philippa on her forehead. And Philippa reacts and responds, sort of. And the lessons are being taught in her father's house. So the father and Martine can hear them singing, and they know completely what they're singing about. Okay, and they're a little bit nervous about this. And so he leaves. It's the end of the lesson. Achille Pepin leaves to go back to his little flat over the grocer's hut. And Philippa comes to her father and her sister Martine, and she says, I do not want to continue taking singing lessons anymore. And her father is like, are you certain of this decision? And she said, yes, I will write Monsieur Pepin a letter. And father, could you please take it to him? And her father says, yes, I will. And it's a wonderful scene in the film. The father is walking across the village to where Pepin is, and Pepin's singing. He's delighted. He has found his protege. He's found a new lease on life. Philippa is going to be this incredible star. The father knocks on the door. He's admitted. He leaves the letter. Pepin's, good night. And we follow the father back out of the grocer's hut and across the street, and you hear the singing, and then suddenly the singing stops. And the father looks up, and he realizes that Pepin has read the letter. And the singing stops, and it is absolutely silent. And the following day, Pepin leaves. He packs his bags, and he leaves, and he goes back to Paris. This is the story about how these two radiant beauties, these two women who were pure in body and soul, broke the hearts of these two famous and worldly men. 15 years pass since Achille Pepin departed and went back to Paris. And during this period of time, Martine and Philippa have continued to do good works around the village. They bring food to the hungry, and they console the ill and the sick, and they take in people who are destitute and they help them. So they are known around the village for doing good works. During this period of time, their father has passed. He's left them some money. They still stay in the little yellow house, which belonged to their father, and they still reside over his congregation, which over the years has grown smaller and smaller and smaller. I think at this point, there's about maybe 8 members of it left, and they come and they gather at Martine and Philippa's house, and they sing hymns, and they read the Bible together. Philippa and Martine have very much aged, but the congregation is older than them even more so. What's also happened with the congregation is that it's become a little bit more spiteful. Old feuds have become cantankerous. Some of the dispositions have become unforgiving. It's not quite the loving group of people that their father had originally founded. And this is something that often happens when the founder of a group passes or departs, whether it's a religious fellowship or whether it's a theater company or whether it's a store. Whenever the founder is no longer there, what happens with the following generation is the glue that held this group together is no longer there. And so there's something definitely missing. And indeed, Martine and Philippa wonder whether they have lost their way, whether they have lost the spirit of their father, whether the study of the Bible is still resonating and speaking to them and their brothers and sisters. Now, in this time, which is 15 years after Achille Pepin has gone back to Paris, there is a stormy night. And as you can imagine, with a small village at the bottom of the fjord, it's very cold, it's very windy, it's very rainy. And this is before electricity. This is the late 19th centuries. And so everyone's pretty much huddled in their cottages, everyone's pretty much huddled in their huts. It's on one of these evenings that there was loud knocking at the door of the two sisters. And they get up and they throw on robes and they come to the door and they open the door and they see in the doorway, silhouetted against the night, this hooded figure who thrusts forward a letter. And Philippa takes the letter and the hood falls off her face and she collapses at their feet in the doorway during this storm. And so the sisters, of course, pick up this woman whom they do not recognize at all, and they take her into their living room, into their parlor, and they light a fire, and Philippa goes and gets her some coffee to help revive her. She's soaked to the skin. The cloak is absolutely soaked. She's absolutely pale. And they pick up the letter and they read it. But it's slow going reading the letter because the letter is written in French. And so they have to sort of draw upon their French education, which is a couple of decades before, in order to read this letter. And what they piece together is that it's a letter from Achille Pepin. First of all, praising Philippa, saying, I hope you can do me the courtesy of remembering me and our lovely time that we had together. You had the voice of an angel, and I sorrowfully regret that we were not able to continue our friendship. I am sending to you a friend of mine who has fallen on hard times. Her name is Babette. And I know that you and your sister are Christian women, and that you will open your door to her and that you will take her in. She cannot return to Paris. That is an impossibility. She has lost her husband and her son in the Paris Commune. Now, what Pepin is referring to is the Paris Commune of 1871. In 1871, there was this revolution that took place. It wasn't as big as the French Revolution itself, but it was a revolution that had taken place where they had overthrown the government following France's crushing defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. The Commune lasted about 2 months, and the uprising came to an end in a vicious week of fighting in which French troops left about 10,000 Parisians dead and much of the city destroyed. The Paris Commune of 1871 is known as the bloodiest urban revolution of the 19th century. And so Babette had lost her husband and her son during this revolution, and she had fled Paris. She had nowhere to go. And she went to her friend Pepin, and her friend Achille Pepin, the very famous opera singer, said, I know of a place where you can go where you can hide out. And it's this remote village that I visited. And there are these two sisters who are very Christian and very giving of themselves. I know that you could find sanctuary there and offer to be their maid. And in the letter, it says, I'm writing for Babette. I'm speaking for her to say that she would be an excellent maid for you. So here we see the Jupiter quality of Xenia coming in, guest friendship. Jupiter is a planet that's very much connected to religion in astrology. We know it is the planet of good fortune and higher purpose. But when we go further with Jupiter, Jupiter is really the planet of religion. Jupiter can even be interpreted the way that you see God in an astrological chart. No two people see God the same way. And as Jupiter can be in one of 12 signs in astrology, there are going to be at least 12 versions or 12 faces of God, 12 ways that someone regards God or regards providence or regards a greater force than themselves that works in their lives. And so Jupiter has always been a planet that has been connected, and it's a very complex planet. It's a planet that is connected to fame, and it is connected to going and making a name for yourself in the world. There's those attributes of Jupiter, because Jupiter does bestow good fortune and fame. So Jupiter has those aspects to it. It can promote that in the world. But Jupiter is also the planet of sanctuary. Jupiter is also the planet of asylums. Jupiter, in its role as the ruling planet of Sagittarius, for instance, and Pisces. Remember that Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces. But let's take Sagittarius here for a moment. Sagittarius is a zodiac sign that's very caught up in religion and really like churches, whether they're synagogues or cathedrals. Houses of worship are associated with Jupiter. And houses of worship have also been associated for many centuries with providing sanctuary, with providing refuge for people who are in dire straits. And so it is in this spirit that Pepin has written this letter for Babette. Babette is fleeing France. She has lost her husband and son to the revolution, which clearly means that her husband and son were on the wrong side of the revolution. They were on the wrong side of the French troops that squashed it. And so she herself is imperiled as well. And so she has come to the home of these two ladies because she's had nowhere else to go, with this letter from Achille Pepin, the opera singer who wanted to make Philippa a great star. And so he's asking a favor of Philippa to give Babette refuge, but he says Babette will also serve you as your maid. So you're not just putting a roof over the head of this woman, she will be your servant. And so the ladies, sort of figured this out in the letter, and they say, well, Bet, we feel awful for your plight. You are welcome to stay here, but we have no money. We cannot afford to pay you as a maid. We don't have any real need of a maid. And Babette looks at them and she says that, then I do not know where to go. And they're like, Babette, let's have something to eat. Let's sleep on it. Let's talk in the morning. And Babette says, no, you don't understand. I have nowhere to go. If you won't take me in, I will die. And so the two sisters, are taken aback, and they're absolutely like, okay, no, we're taking you in. And she said, I will serve you as a maid, and I will not ask for any money. I don't need any money from you. I don't want any money from you. And so the sisters, after Babette pleads, agree. And so Babette serves these two Puritan sisters as a maid without pay. And what we see here is they have opened up their home to someone in need, and they have given this person a place to stay. And in thanks and in reciprocity, Babette stays on as their maid. And this reminds us that Jupiter is the patron planet of pilgrims and refugees. The idea of Jupiter ruling over travelers comes from pilgrims on holy pilgrimages, traversing great stretches of land and country, and even countries, to go and visit sacred sites. So the idea of traveling in search of God, in search of something higher than, is a pilgrim. Now, the two sisters haven't left their village at all, but they are pilgrims in the world. They are searching for God in the world, and as such, they are also a place of a haven, of sanctuary, of shelter for the other people that Jupiter is the patron planet of, and that's refugees, people who have been forced to leave their lands as a result of war or violence or some sort of threat to themselves. And so they have to leave their lands, and they have to find their way in another land. They have to find a new home somewhere else. So here we see Xenia, the idea of guest friendship, taking someone into your house in this beautiful expression of Jupiter. And we see the ladies as the pilgrims, They are spiritual pilgrims, and Babette is the refugee. And this is how the two of them come together and bond in Babette's feast. So as I was saying earlier, the ladies were a bit of a curious sight in the village. Okay, you have two Puritan sisters, unmarried, who wear nothing but black or gray all day and evening. Okay, that's all they ever appear in. And you have this French maid who speaks broken Norwegian and mostly speaks French, who is working for them free of charge. There's a wonderful scene in the movie in which Martine is showing Babette how to make the meals that they take to the poor in the village. And what they serve is something called brown ale bread soup. Okay, so it's brown ale bread soup, and Martine shows her how to make the ale and soak the bread in it, and then put it into little bowls to go and take, the elderly or the poor. And Babette, being a French woman, is polite, but when Martine's looking another way, is kind of like looking like, people eat this? That's kind of her unspoken reaction. But Babette takes over the feeding of the poor. She takes over the laundry. She takes over the washing of the windows of the house. She takes over the housekeeping. And what the sisters begin to notice over a period of time is that the poor are really happy to see the sisters, especially if Babette's coming along. And the reason for it is that Babette is, shall we say, altering the recipe of the brown ale bread soup that's being given. And all of a sudden, people are really looking forward to this meal. It's so delicious. It's so wonderful. Not only that, but Babette begins sort of subtly altering the menu of the house. And she's also really good at bargaining with the fishermen, and she's really good at bargaining with the shopkeepers. And she gets the food at a good price. And it's always the best fish. It's the best chicken. It's always the best that it could possibly be. So not only are the sisters themselves noticeably eating better meals, but they're also commenting on how much money they have, where they would just spend the money to feed themselves and feed everyone else. Babette is striking deals and setting up alliances and friendships and getting deals and bargains throughout the village. And so their bank account is improving. One day, Babette mentions just casually a lottery ticket that she has to renew every year. She has to send something in the mail to renew a lottery ticket. And the sisters are like, they're sort of mixed about that. Like, oh, well, money, that's vanity of the world. But, but it's for Babette, so that's good. So this is a wonderful thing. 12 years go by that she renews this ticket. And one year, there is a post that comes to the door of the sisters, and a letter is given to Babette. And Babette sits down at the kitchen table and looks up at the sisters with great surprise. And they're like, Babette, is it bad news? What's going on? And Babette says, I have won the lottery. I've won 10,000 francs. And the sisters are absolutely like, they don't know how to respond. So 10,000 francs arrive. And Philippa goes and gets a little box to keep the francs and the coins in. And Babette thanks her for the box, and she takes it upstairs. And Philippa and Martine look at one another very sadly, because they realize that now Babette is a very rich woman. She's a very wealthy woman. She's got 10,000 francs. That's more money than these two sisters will ever see in their entire lifetime. And they're sad because it means Babette's going to leave. Obviously, she's going to go back to France with this money and set herself up and live a wealthy life. And the sisters are happy for her, but the sisters are also missing her already at the thought that Babette will shortly be leaving them. And so one September evening, the sisters are discussing how that December 15th will be the 100th anniversary of their father, who has passed away. And they will have their congregation of 8, and they will sit around the table, and they want to do something special. And so they're discussing, maybe we'll serve coffee and bread or something like that. I mean, and this would be a good hymn to sing at our father's 100th anniversary. I mean, their aspirations are really quite modest as to celebrating their father's 100th anniversary. And Babette's working in the background. And a couple of days later, Babette says, I would like to do something for you that would mean a great deal to me. And the sisters are like, oh, you don't have to do anything for us. And she's like, no, no, no. It would be actually a favor to me. This is something I really, really want to do. I never met your father. He's obviously a very holy man, a very revered man. And I would like to do something for his 100th anniversary on December 15th. And what I would like to do is cook you a French meal. And they're like, oh, a French meal. That sounds lovely. How wonderful. And she's like, a real French meal. And the sisters pause and they're like, what exactly is a real French meal? They're starting to get a little bit uncomfortable with the idea. And Babette says, please let me cook this. And they say, no, 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 this is ridiculous, Babette. No, you don't have to do this. And Babette finally says, listen, have I ever asked you for anything in the 15 years that I have worked for you? And the sister's like, no, no, not at all. She's like, this is the one thing I'm asking you. I'm asking you to please let me cook you a real French meal. And I want to serve it to you and to your brothers and sisters, which is how they refer to the other members of their congregation. And we can sit down and we can celebrate your father's 100th anniversary with a French meal. And that would make me the happiest woman alive. So in November of that year, Babette asks if she can have leave for 10 days. And the two sisters are like, Babette, please, you don't have to ask that. You can come and go as you please. And she's like, I need 10 days to leave. I will not be in communication, but at the end of 10 days, I will return. And they're like, well, Babette, can we ask what this is for? And Babette said, I am collecting the ingredients for your French meal. And the sisters are like, oh, okay. So Babette leaves for 10 days, and 10 days later, she returns. And she returns almost like the Queen of Sheba coming to visit Solomon. Okay. She comes with these wheelbarrows, these wagons that are full of wine. And packed among the bottles of wine are cheeses and vegetables and caviar and sour cream. And Babette, with her hood and her cape, is carrying a large wooden cage of quail, which are chirping. There are peaches and grapes and fresh figs. And most remarkable of all, and this captures the immediate attention of Martine, is an enormous turtle, a huge turtle. And Martine has never seen anything like this before. And she's actually rather haunted by it. This isn't an image of wonder. The turtle is a frightening image because it's a sea turtle and it's tremendous in its size. And then Martine sees these bottles being taken out of these wagons. And she asks Babette, Babette, I must ask you, are these bottles of wine? With the intention of like, we cannot have wine in this house. We are good Lutherans. I mean, we do not drink wine. And Babette says, wine? Oh, no, 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 madame. It is Clos Vougeot, 1841, from Philippa in Rue Montorgueil. And Martine is like, who's that? Philippe? He is a very good friend of mine. And Martine's like, oh, so these are from Philippe's house. Okay, that sounds lovely. I mean, at no point does she put together the idea that it's a type of wine and there's a vineyard and all these sorts of things. She just thinks it's something that's been gifted or given to Babette. And she takes Babette's word that it's not wine. And so Babette goes about her preparations. All of a sudden, pots that they didn't know they had emerge. All of a sudden, dishes that they didn't know existed emerge as Babette plans this enormous feast. And as she looks over her menagerie of foods. So here we see Venus in Taurus, okay? This is Venus at 29 degrees Taurus. These are all the ingredients that are going to go into this sumptuous meal. Now, remember, This is the late 19th century. So these aren't things that Babette went to Whole Foods and purchased. I mean, these are living creatures and they need to be kept fresh, and things are going to be refrigerated, basically held outside and protected in the snow of Norway. So the sisters can very much see what's being presented here. But this creates a quandary for Martine, because Martine is not quite convinced that this is a wine-free evening. There are lots of bottles there, and she's beginning to become quite afraid that she has led her congregation into a den of iniquity. But at the same point, she's in a predicament because Babette asked to do this as a favor. They said yes, so she doesn't want to hurt Babette, but at the same time, she doesn't want this bacchanalia going on in her father's house. So what Martine does is that she goes to the different members of the congregation and she describes her dilemma, that Babette had asked to do this. She had said yes. She did not know that it was going to be this elaborate. And so she's kind of warning them about this. And this follows a dream that she had had the night before, where the dream was full of this turtle, approaching, and Babette holding out, glass and pouring wine and offering it. So at this point, Martine's imagination has run away with her, and she thinks there's going to be a witches' Sabbath, in her father's house. And so the congregation reassures Martine, and they say, we understand your predicament, that she wants to make this meal, and we all love Babette, and so we don't want to dishonor her. But at the same time, we will promise not to respond to the meal. We will not say anything about the meal, and we will not respond to the meal. And Martine says, yes, that's good. And she said, we must steel ourselves, sister. We must steel ourselves against the temptations of sensuality. And so we will sit through this meal, and we will not say one word of praise or disdain, and we will stoically eat politely this meal so that Babette doesn't feel bad either. And so they agree. So December 15th comes, and Babette has hired a waiter, a young boy. He's 14 years old with red hair, and she's kind of teaching him how she wants things done. She takes out the linen or the beautiful dining table covering, and she irons it. The meal is being prepared. The bottles have all been set up. The dishes and glasses have been organized. There will be different dishes with glasses for wine, for champagne, for sherry, bowls. This is a major meal. Now, the seating is originally for 11, but news comes that there's going to be a last-minute addition and that there will be a seating for 12. And Martine asks Babette if that's going to be a problem. Babette's like, no, not a problem at all. We have more than enough. We can absolutely accommodate 12 people at the dinner table. And so what Martine then discovers is that the 12th person is going to be Lauren Lowenheim, whom she has not seen in decades. As I had mentioned before, Lauren's, his aunt, was a member of this congregation, and she still came even though it had dwindled down to 8 or 9. But Lawrence has come to visit her again. Now, in the interim, since the time that Lawrence left Martine and said that the world is hard and cruel, and he chose the worldly ambition of becoming a military officer, he's become a great general, and he's really quite famous. And he is coming back to visit his aunt, and the aunt asks, would you like to join us for dinner for the anniversary of Martine and Philippa's father, the 100th anniversary of his birth? And he said, yes, if you will have me. In the interim, as I said, he's become a famous general. He married lady-in-waiting at the Queen's court, and he's really quite revered and highly esteemed. He's also a very religious man, not religious in the conventional sense, but he's a very spiritual man. And this has always been something that's been of great conflict with him. On one hand, he's a military general, and so he's in charge of wars and people getting blasted to pieces. But then on the other hand, he's very much a spiritual, a deeply spiritual man, not too unlike Marcus Aurelius. And like Marcus Aurelius, he has this very deep soul, which is distressed. It's not at peace. He is not at peace with himself. So although he swore that he would never see Martine again, coincidence, meaning that he happened to be visiting his aunt, and this happened to be the 100th anniversary of her father, he says yes to come to this simple dinner to be held in regard to the 100th anniversary of the great reverend. So Lowenheim appears at the door with his aunt. They've been driven there by sleigh. And so the driver is going to hang out in the kitchen and help serve and prepare things and stuff like that. So he appears at the door with his aunt, and he's very courteous to seeing Martine again. And she's very courteous in greeting him. And they sit down at this dinner. And it's a dinner that, as I said, Lowenheim expects to be, very Puritan, basic, simple Norwegian fare, nothing fancy and nothing particularly remarkable. But he already sees the way that the table has been laid out, and the candles and the glasses and the dishes, that there's something not typical here. Now, I'm sure his aunt had warned him ahead of time, or mentioned ahead of time, that the two sisters have a French maid. And so he's not completely staggered at the door or anything like that, but he's impressed. He's like, okay. And so he sits down to dinner with the other guests, the other members of the congregation, and there's about maybe 8 of them, and they don't say anything. He makes conversation, tries to make conversation, and they go, yeah, and sit there because they have sworn not to say anything and to steel themselves against temptation. So dinner is served, and the first course, of course, is the turtle soup. And so he tastes it, and he stops, and he says, "This is real turtle soup," he's amazed that the way it smells, the way it tastes. This is real turtle soup, and they're like, as they sip at their turtle soup. And then he's given something to drink, and he stops again, and he says, "This is amazing. This is an amontillado, and this is the finest amontillado I've ever tasted." And he's just, he savors the taste and looks around the table, and they're sipping at the glass, and he's like, okay, what's going on here? Is his reaction. He is as much surprised by the quality of the food, the aroma, what he's smelling coming from the kitchen, what he's smelling coming from his bowl, what's in his glass, as he is by the indifference of everyone who's sitting around this table. And then after that course comes the champagne, Veuve Clicquot, with Blini Demidoff. And he sips the champagne, and he's like, "This is most definitely Veuve Clicquot 1860. And they're like, "Yeah." One of them says, "We're expecting snow." And he's like, "Do you realize what you're drinking here? And where did you get this?" I mean, that's what's going on with him quietly in his mind. And then comes out the blini and the caviar and the cream. And he is just smelling it, and he's eating it, and he's just like, "My God, what is this?" And they're all eating and they're drinking, but very modestly. They're finishing what's on their plates, and they're finishing what's in their glasses, but modestly. And then after this comes the caillou sarcophage. The caillou sarcophage is basically quail in a pastry with a filling, and it looked to my eyes like it might be truffles, or somehow truffles were involved in it. But it's done in a baked pastry in which the tail of the quail and the head of the quails is perched on this baked pastry. And he sees this, and he stops. He looks down at the meal, and he's like, "Do you know what you're eating?" And they're like, "This is," they're like nodding, and he's like, "This is caillou sarcophage. What's this doing here?" And they're like, "Caillou," and he says, "I remember when I was in Paris being invited by my host at the time, General Galifet. And he invited me to this renowned cafe. It was the most famous cafe in all of Paris. It was known for its exquisite food, and we were served there caillou sarcophage. Now, caillou sarcophage was said to have been invented by the chef of Café Anglais. And what made Café Anglais even more remarkable than its menu was the chef, who was a woman. She was the only chef in Paris, and she was regarded by everyone as the greatest culinary genius of the age. It was impossible to get a seat at Café Anglais. It was impossible to get in unless you knew the right people. And everyone celebrated this food. This was the best food. And I do not understand something here, brothers and sisters, how you could have caillou sarcophage here. Caillou sarcophage was invented by her. It was the signature dish of the restaurant, of the cafe. So how could that possibly be here? My host, General Gallifet, said that in the past, he had fought a duel over the most beautiful woman in Paris. But now he would never fight a duel like that, ever. In a million years, he would only fight that duel for one woman. And the only woman that he would fight that duel for was the chef who invented this dish. And I am astonished how it could possibly be here. And he's doing the math. It's like, how does that get here in this fjord? And, I mean, this is a miracle. But he can't really share it with everyone because everyone is eating politely and not saying anything. So he just sort of stops. What's amazing about what's going on here in Babette's feast is the miracle of the feast itself. Particularly in early Christianity, communion took place around a meal and at a table. And this is something that Isak Dinesen is reproducing here. Here we are being treated to this feast, this meal. It's very Venus and Taurus. It's absolutely elite. This is food that could only be had at Café Anglais, which no longer exists because of the Commune. And obviously, the general never thought he was going to see or taste again in his entire life. But what's fascinating about this is that he's the only one who's registering what's going on. He's, in essence, the only one who's registering the miracle that's taking place. And his reaction is how, this is a miracle. How could this possibly be taking place? But what also happens at this dinner is that the brothers and sisters, the congregation of the dean, begin telling stories about the dean. They begin telling stories about the way he used to say service. They begin telling stories of his charity. One woman recounts, do you remember that time when he swore that he would go and preach to the village across the fjord? And we had that storm, that horrible storm. And he swore, he promised he would give a Christmas sermon. And the water was too dangerous to go. But yet, on Christmas Day, the fjord had frozen over and he walked over the ice. He walked over the water to the church and gave the sermon. And they were all, yes, yes, yes. He was a very holy man. He was a very, very special man. So as the general Leeuwenhoek is amazed at the food that he's eating, what's happening in the background is the congregation is drinking the same things he's drinking, not as much, but drinking and eating the same thing that he's eating in this communal gathering. And here we're heading towards Jupiter because Jupiter rules over groups of people who group around a belief or school or discipline or community. Jupiter is pretty much the planet of community. And here we have a spiritual community. While the general is astonished that this food could be appearing on this table, we have another thing that's going on in which the community, which has been very cantankerous and very embittered towards another, in which the sisters have been worried, will we ever come together, is beginning to share stories, tell stories of the dean, of the reverend that they miss. And so this meal is putting them in this spirit, in this light. Now, we all know that they're eating their fill of amazing food and they're all probably getting drunk, but in addition to, this is filling the room, and the room has gone from very cold and guarded to very warm and relaxed, and it's at this point, after salad is served and then dessert, which is baba room, then there are there's a big plate, a platter of grapes and passion fruit, and there's a pineapple that's being passed around the table. General Lowenhelm gives a speech. He stands up and he gives a speech to his brothers and sisters, and the speech is beautiful. The speech I wanted to read to you, it's from the book, and it goes like this. He says, "Mercy and truth, my friends, have met together. Righteousness and bliss shall kiss one another. Man, my friends, is frail and foolish. We have all been told that grace is to be found in the universe, but in our own human foolishness, we imagine divine grace to be finite. And for this reason, we tremble before making our choice in life, and we tremble after having made it. We tremble in fear of having chosen wrong. But the moment comes when our eyes are opened and we realize that grace is infinite. Grace, my friends, demands nothing from us, but that we shall await it with confidence and acknowledge it in gratitude. Grace, brothers, makes no conditions and singles out none of us in particular. Grace takes us all to its bosom and proclaims general amnesty. See, that which we have chosen is given us, and that which we have refused is also at the same time granted us. Aye, that which we have rejected is poured upon us abundantly. For mercy and truth have met together, and righteousness and bliss have kissed one another." I had such a deep response to this speech. I think it's beautiful, but it resonated so deeply in me. And I had to really sit with this speech for a while. And what began to emerge in the speech, and it's here in this moment in the film, is grace, okay? And this is where we enter the realm of Neptune. Jupiter is associated to faith, beliefs, religion. Jupiter is ultimately associated to a knowable God. If you attend a house of worship, chances are there's a doctrine, scripture, holy writings, things that are recited, things that are shared, things that are known and familiar. You might even recite a prayer by rote or sing a song because it's a song that you're used to singing. And so Jupiter, in many ways in astrology, can be the face of the known God. But Neptune, who's the co-ruler of the zodiac sign of Pisces, remember that Jupiter is the traditional ruler and Neptune is the modern ruler. Neptune is the unknown face of God, the inexplicable face of providence, because Neptune is associated to the idea of mysticism. And mysticism is essentially, intellectually, incoherent. There's no way that you can explain a mystical experience. There's no way you can put words to it theories, formulas, ideas, explanations. But when you have a mystical experience, that experience fills your soul and it overrides your mind. It overrides your heart. It overrides your body. It overrides your spirit. You are transformed in a mystical experience. And it doesn't have to be a grand thing. What Isak Dinesen is illustrating here, and what we see in this beautiful film of Babette's Feast, is a coming together of a congregation who have, in enjoining in a meal and wine and sherry and champagne, have transcended. They've been transported to another place. Now, some people might be, well, that's what a good meal and wine and champagne or whatever does to you. But it's much deeper than that. And this is what Isak Dinesen is after. When she does this speech, she brings up grace. And grace is a fascinating concept, particularly in Lutheran religion, because grace is what the blessings that are bestowed by God, or whatever you call providence, or what's divine in the universe. These are the blessings. This is the goodness, the favor that is bestowed by God on people who haven't earned it, on people who don't deserve it, and on people who don't perhaps even recognize it. Okay, so this is where Neptune departs from Jupiter. Jupiter, being a benefic, is really about goodwill. The good that you do makes the world a better place. And so good acts play a very large role in Jupiter. And good acts, selfless acts, generous acts, philanthropic acts, play a large role in religion and play a large role in society. But when you get into Neptune and the realm of the mystical, the realm of the incoherent, you can't make sense of it. Divinity. This is what she's talking about with grace. So when he says, man, us, my friends, is foolish, we have all been told that grace can be found in the universe. And Neptune is that boundless grace. That's what it represents in astrology. It's hard for people to understand because Neptune is associated with illusion and with visions. But Neptune isn't just about deluding. Neptune is about transcendence. Pluto is in charge of transformation. Neptune is in charge of transcendence. Okay. So we're told that grace is to be found in the universe, but in our human foolishness and short-sightedness, we imagine divine grace to be finite. And for this reason, we tremble. In other words, we're afraid of God because we believe that God's grace is finite. It can be used up and wasted. And so because we feel that God's grace is finite because we're finite, we tremble and we're afraid of God. We're afraid of making the right choice, and we're afraid of making the wrong choice. We're afraid of making a choice in life, and then after having made it, was that the right choice? So basically what he's saying is that we're afraid of choosing things in life. We're told what we should choose, and then after we choose it, we're afraid that we're going to have regret for what that choice is. And this is speaking absolutely to his love for Martine. He chose not to go down that path, to be with her. He had no way of describing what he felt for her at that time. But now at this meal, he is he's connected to something transcendent, to something graceful. And graceful, of course, connects Venus to Neptune. So we tremble before making our choice in life, and after having made that choice, we tremble in fear of having chosen wrong. But the moment comes when our eyes are opened and we realize that grace is infinite. Just because our imagination is finite, just because our understanding of God is finite, doesn't mean that grace is. Grace is infinite. And grace demands nothing from us. It's not based on rewards. It's not based on the good things that you do. And that we should await that experience of grace with confidence and gratitude. This is where it gets fascinating. He says grace makes no conditions. And I love this line. It takes us all to its bosom and declares general amnesty. You are all safe here. See that what we have chosen is given us, he goes on, and that which we have refused is also at the same time granted us. This is where it gets like, okay, where's it going? What we have chosen is given us, and what we've refused is also granted us. That which we have rejected is poured upon us abundantly. What he's kind of saying here is that we make choices from a finite place of grace, of this fear and trembling that if we choose wrong, we're going to hell, or we've lost out on life, or we went down the wrong path. But what he's saying is that grace, Neptune, is this aspect of providence, which is so unknowable because it's beyond what we can describe in scripture. It's beyond what we could describe in a prayer. It's beyond our morality. It's going to show a benevolence that hasn't been earned, okay? It's going to reward people who haven't done anything to earn it. It's going to be given to people who are rejects of society. It's going to be given to people who may not be nice people, but all are welcome. All are granted this general amnesty. And that's when he says, for mercy and truth have come together. Think about that. Mercy and truth have come together. How many times have we been faced with a quandary, especially, with the news these days, where you see these extraordinary moral quandaries that are going on? What is free speech? How can this people done something awful to these people? And what's retaliation? And when does that go too far? And why does there have to even be retaliation? These extraordinary moral quandaries. And he says, mercy and truth. Truth can be hard. Truth can be like, this is the truth, and you need to open your eyes up to it, whatever. Think of factual truth. Let's take that one. Mercy and truth. Imagine factual truth. This is scientific and empirical. Can't argue with it, truth. And mercy. The idea of mercy. Holding hands with that kind of sharp truth, stark truth, mercy, holding hands here. Righteousness and bliss have kissed. Righteousness. When one's feeling righteous, that's like, I'm better than you. This is what I believe in. I'm justified in feeling and acting this way. Righteousness can have a hard quality to it. Righteousness and bliss come together. That there's a belief in the ultimate good of the universe, even though we are too finite to understand it. But we can experience it. We can experience it as bliss. Ecstasy, bliss, experiences that are hard to explain. Unconditional love. These are all aspects that have been attributed and that are associated with the planet Neptune in astrology. And this is what I hear coming through in his speech. So grace is poured out regardless of the right of the recipient to receive it or even recognize it. So in other words, grace can be poured over people who never understand that they're in a state of grace. They don't recognize it, and grace doesn't care. You don't need to recognize it. Okay? It's just there because it's boundless, it's infinite. So it's obvious that the rest of the congregation doesn't really understand what General Lowenheim is talking about. They've had a lot to eat. They're going, yeah, this is good, and hallelujah, and all these sorts of things. But what happens in the film is that there are two ladies who have not been talking to each other for the whole film. They're very stern and hard. And it's over this fight they had as young women. And they, when the whole dinner party gets up and sits in the drawing room, the two of them sit next to one another and they begin recounting their childhood days and when they used to sing songs with one another. And you just see the friendship restored. There's two gentlemen who sit down with each other. They've been fighting because one cheated the other one out of money. And he sits down next to the guy and he says, you know, you cheated me out of that money. And the guy's like, yeah, I did. He's like, well, that's okay. Yeah. You know, they're like boys. They're like laughing at the fact that one cheated them out of money. It doesn't matter that one cheated them out of money anymore. And then there's an embittered man and woman who had thought about having a love affair when they were younger. And she blamed him for making her cheat in her heart on her husband. So they didn't really have the love affair. What they had the guilt from an unrealized love affair. But they sit down next to each other in a corner and she kisses him, you know, on the lips in a very romantic kiss, a kiss that has waited decades to happen. In this story, Isak Dinesen writes of this passage, the old dean's flock were humble people. Later, when they thought of this evening, it never occurred to them that they might have been exalted by their own merit. They realized that the infinite grace that the general spoke of had been allotted to them. The vain illusions of this earth had dissolved before their eyes like smoke, and they had seen the universe as it really is. They had been given 1 hour of the millennium. I wanted to share that passage. I think it's such a gorgeous passage because they suddenly have experienced heavenly joy and bliss here in their lives. They won't remember it like food and wine and drink. You know, it doesn't stay with you, you know, but it stays in the soul. It stays in the soul. And for that 1 hour, they had been given a view of the millennium, of eternity. It's such a beautiful moment. And the general and Martine also have a moment. He's taking the sled back to his aunt's with his aunt. And they're in the same alcove that they were in decades before. And he kisses her hand like he had decades before. And he says to her, you know, I have been with you every day of my life. You know that, don't you? And Martine's like, yes. And he says, and I shall be with you every day that is left to me. Every evening I shall sit down, if not in the flesh, which means nothing, but in spirit, which is all, to dine with you. Just like tonight. For tonight I have learned that in this world, anything is possible. It's a beautiful moment because when he had last left her, he said that this world was a hard, cruel, impossible place. When he says goodbye to her again, to go back to his wife and his life, he says to her, I will dine with you every night. Not physically, what's the point of that? But in spirit. I will dine with you as I have dined with you, as I have known you every night of every day throughout my entire life. And this is Neptunian. There's a word for it in Christianity, which is agape. And it's not a physical love. It's often described as a sacred love, and people sort of associate that with being prudish or whatever, but it's not. It speaks to those loves that I think we've all experienced in our life, in which there probably were romantic feelings, but it was never consummated, it never came together. But instead of filling our heart with something bleak and bitter, our thoughts of this person, our love for this person uplift and they transcend. That's something that years before, when he was younger, he could not articulate. Those words weren't available to him. He could not articulate that that's what he was feeling. And now he can say it. He can speak from his heart. He can speak from his soul. And he has transcended the limits of his life. He's transformed his life from a life of regret and being not at peace with himself to one of fulfillment and one of communion with another person, with someone he's always loved and has probably been the person that he's loved most in his life. And even though we will not be together physically, or we will be together soulfully, our souls are connected. It's opposite of what he had said earlier. Before, life was impossible, and now he's learned everything in life is possible. The illusion that has been dispelled is the illusion of regret, the illusion of shortcomings, the illusion of a road, of taking the wrong road or making the wrong choice and having regret for it. Those are the illusions that we often call our reality that have been dispelled in this moment. And she hears him and she knows it. The actress is so beautiful in this moment. And you just totally see that she totally gets it. So the guests depart, and Babette is in the kitchen putting together the dishes and racking up the glasses and getting all the empty bottles to throw away. She's cleaning up. So it's really Babette among the refuse of this feast that she's prepared. And Martine says, "Babette, that was a nice dinner." And Babette says solidly, "I was once chef at the Café Anglais." She's sitting there among the pots. She's bone tired. And she says, "I was once chef at the Café Anglais." And Martine says, "We will all remember this dinner when you return to Paris." And Babette says, "I'm not going back to Paris." And Philippa says, "You're not going back to Paris?" And Babette says, "There's no one waiting for me there. They're all gone. And I have no money." And Martine, "No money? But the 10,000 francs." And Babette, "All spent." And Philippa says, "All spent?" And Babette says, "Dinner for 12 at Café Anglais. Costs 10,000 francs. Martine, "But still, Babette, you ought not to have given away your money, not for our sake." And Babette says, "It wasn't just for your sake." And Philippa says, "But you will be poor now for the rest of your life. What are you to do?" And Babette says, "I am an artist, madame. And an artist is never poor." I love that line. And I love that that's how the film ends. Because what she's talking about is this fusion of Venus, art, mysticism, Neptune, Jupiter, fortune, but not the fortune you count like 10,000 francs. It's a fortune that goes through your life. It's a place that's not easily explained, but it's an experience that many of us have had when we are doing something that we love to do. Writing, composing a song, painting, knitting, creating something. Maybe, why not? Raising a dog, something that gives you delight in your life that goes beyond a vocation. You do it because in the doing of it, you are in a place of ecstasy. And the money doesn't matter. The status doesn't matter. The conditions don't matter. You are in a place of ecstasy where you are living your art and where you are grateful for being able to practice your art. Doesn't need to be published or sung or whatever. You're just grateful that you get to do this thing that you do, this thing that is yours, this thing that connects you to a sacred experience. And in that way, we are all artists, and artists are never poor. If you enjoyed what you saw, please press the like button. It helps more than you know. If you could subscribe, that would be wonderful. I've had such a wonderful time visiting with you this week, and I can't wait to get together next time on Christopher Renstrom Astrology.